Okay, all set to go. Now, we're going to spend a little bit of time this evening talking in a bit more detail about some of the things we started on last week. But I happen to be having a conversation with someone today about this idea of value. The background of this is people know Ross Greenwood. Ross Greenwood, the finance guy at Channel 9, has a radio show, and I sometimes do some interviews with Ross. I did an interview with him a couple of weeks ago on Qantas and Qantas's brand value, particularly after their dispute last October. And I was just talking to a colleague about it earlier today, and everyone remember the Qantas dispute? Everyone remember what happened? They grounded their entire fleet. And this is what happened. October the 30th, 2011, Qantas grounded their entire fleet, 128 odd planes. There was an ongoing series of industrial disputes. Basically, under Australian regulations, a union can give an employer a notice of dispute and say, we are going to take some action in 3 days' time. It might be we're going to go on strike in 3 days' time. The organisation then gets ready to deal with that dispute, and then the notice gets withdrawn. That's what the maintenance engineers and the baggage handlers are doing. So they were threatening to stop work, but they didn't. Of course, in the meantime, the union, the airline has to work on the basis they're going to stop work. And anyone who flew with Qantas in that period might remember that the pilots would wear a tie or a pin that asked you to support pilots, and they'd make an announcement over the PA system saying, we hope this doesn't inconvenience you, but we just want you to know why the pilots were in dispute with Qantas. So this went on for several months, and Qantas claimed that this sort of series of rolling issues with the union were costing them $15 million a week. And they decided that they would escalate the dispute by grounding all the planes and basically locking out the workers. Now, I'm not going to go into the sort of industrial relations side of it and the interaction with government and all those sorts of things. But it meant that about 15,000 passengers who were ready to fly, and rough rule of thumb, half of them were probably ready to fly home, half of them to leave home. So you got about 7,500 people who basically had no way of getting home unless they could change their travel arrangements. Once the fleet was grounded, the cost of the strike went up, or the cost of the industrial action went up to $20 million a day. So from $15 million a week to $20 million a day. Of course, the unions were outraged. They were outraged because Qantas hadn't given them any notice that this was the plan that they were going to take. Their members were locked out. The Government Industrial Relations Commission, or equivalent body, was called in to resolve it. The tourism industry was outraged because you've got a whole lot of people who've made bookings for rental cars, hotels, whatever else, eat out in restaurants, who weren't going to turn up. The federal government was sort of outraged, and what I mean by sort of outraged is they spent a lot of time talking about whose fault it was, whether it was their fault, whether it was their dispute to get involved in or not. Like most governments, the Australian government has the power to get involved in an industrial dispute and decide whether they want to or not. And it was a bit awkward for the government because they didn't want to be seen to be taking sides against Australia's nationally branded airline, but also it's a Labor government, so intuitively there's some connection to the union movement. So all these people were outraged. They were outraged at what they saw to be, in terminology we use here, a loss of value. Loss of employment rights, loss of tourism income, loss of relationships. And the government, anyone who saw... the other thing that is worth noting is that the day prior to the fleet being grounded, Qantas shareholders had an annual general meeting at which they passed a series of, I think, $12 million worth of bonuses for the senior executives of Qantas. So if you just took those top-level groups, they all saw themselves as being disadvantaged by all this, particularly customers. What about Qantas shareholders? How do you think they reacted to this? Well, this is a tough question because they either liked it or they didn't. Who think they liked it? Who think they liked the CEO of the airline saying, I'm going to escalate this dispute, it's going to cost us $20 million a day? Or shareholders said, well, hang on, we've just paid you guys $12 million. Shouldn't you be sorting this out? You're disenfranchising one of the most trusted workforces in Australia, which is Qantas pilots. You know, when they do that, professions that rated on trust, and nurses are always on top, pilots are always up near the top of that list. So, who thinks that shareholders would have liked this? One person. Go to the front of the room. Shareholders loved it. Shareholders thought this was great. That's the Qantas share price. The down pointing arrow is the Qantas share price on the day the dispute was called. It spiked. And I'm not sure whether there's a shadow on my... I only whipped this up because I had to go to the ASX and get a copy of the share price, so I only did this. That's why I was running a little bit late. And there's a long-term trend line that I've banged in there twice. I'm not sure why the shadow line's in there. But anyway, I thought it was not worth worrying about. So the long-term trend price in rising share price, in rising shares. Now the shareholders are the owners of Qantas. So the owners of Qantas were happy that the CEO was in dispute with everyone else, but had a $20 million a day dispute. Now, I don't expect anyone to have sort of any intimate knowledge of the circumstances that led to this rolling strike, but basically, Alan Joyce is quite interesting. And I'm not defending one side or the other in this, I'm just presenting this as an interesting case where people see the same, in terms of value, people see the same activity in two different ways. So the shareholders and Alan Joyce had said that these ongoing disputes were trashing the Qantas brand and trashing the Qantas long-term strategy. And the reason he argued that is that he said these ongoing disputes were basically escalating the cost of doing business and making us uncompetitive. And that's where the $15 million a week comes into it. So basically shareholders said, we're happy to take the short-term pain, we're happy to take the short-term loss in customer satisfaction, brand value, whatever it might be. But it's worth noting that Qantas had already lost, I think, on a year-on-year basis, their bookings were down 20% from October 2010 to October 2011. Their international bookings were down about 15%. Now, the bookings that were down for Qantas were their East Coast bookings, Melbourne, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, which are their most profitable routes. So the cost of it wasn't just the number, 15% of their business. It was actually their most valuable passengers were actually moving somewhere else anyway. So that's sort of all the background to it. But I just think it's interesting that different groups would interpret this entirely differently. If you're wondering what happened there, oil prices. Oil prices went through. There was a dispute in the Middle East, and oil prices went through the roof. And you see the share price recovered, went down again, and there's a sort of a long-term haul again. I'm not recommending to anyone buy Qantas shares. I'd never buy shares in the airline industry. But I just think it's an interesting example of how different people look at value from different perspectives. Now, I just want to finish off something that we spoke about last week. In fact, I spoke about right at the start of last week, which was Peter Drucker. And I mentioned that Peter Drucker said that the purpose of the business is to create and keep the customer. It's been a long day. Do you want to throw something at you before fall asleep? I've got cold water. So create and keep the customer is the foundation of a business and keeps it in existence. Now this might sound a bit dramatic, the customer alone creates employment, but it's sort of true. It costs you money to have employees, there's only one source of income, and that's from customers. So he basically saw that any organisation had two functions, and only two. One was marketing, the other one was innovation. Now, I'll just emphasise again, in this context when I talk about marketing, I'm not talking about marketing as something that a department does. Well, there's a marketing department, there's a sales department, a production department. I'm talking about marketing as something that an organisation does. And as we talk more about value creation, you'll understand that what I'm talking about is something that an organisation does, and that marketing in this context is something that an organisation does, and we'll talk about a couple of examples. And innovation. So finding either new things to do or new ways to do old things. They're really the only two categories of innovation. Of course, the other thing about marketing is marketing for most organisations is the interface with customers. So, once again, I don't mean a marketing department, but it's where the company meets the customer. That's sort of what marketing's about. So, the idea of marketing has an important role to play, both in taking the offerings of the company to the market, but also in taking market knowledge back into the company. And we're going to have a case study later of an organisation that one of the most famous brands in the world that almost went bankrupt because they forgot to take information about the customer, or they actually stopped looking for information from the customer. Innovation's a difficult thing. A lot of very well-known, very successful people made a lot of interesting comments about innovation. Now, my two favourites are probably Bill Gates. The internet, we're not interested in it. Never thought it would take off. And the other person who wasn't interested in the internet was Rupert Murdoch. Now, what's the problem facing? Rupert Murdoch owns more newspapers than anyone in the world, and he's trying to move his newspapers online. He's trying to create a digital business. What's the problem that he's got? Apart from hacking into phones and all those sorts of things, and scandal, his wife belting people and whatever. What's the problem Rupert Murdoch's got? What do you currently pay for online news? Nothing. So who's going to pay for something they get for free? And that's the problem that Rupert Murdoch's got, in a very simplistic sort of way. There's reasons why people will pay for a newspaper. There's very few reasons why someone would pay for value they already get for free, part of the value equation. Now, it might be different if you want to subscribe to a newspaper that has articles by journalists that you really like, where there's opinion pieces you think are relevant, where there's people writing about stuff that you think is really interesting. But when people are just writing about, here's the weather, here's the sports reports, here's what's happening in government, and what have you, very hard to get people to pay for that. Now, of course, as much as Rupert Murdoch now likes digital, Rupert Murdoch is also the person who paid, I think, $700 million for a company called MySpace. Any of you ever heard of MySpace? It's more people about 10 years older than you remember MySpace. Innovation's an interesting thing. If we went back 5 years, what was the biggest search engine in the world? Yahoo. How's Yahoo going? What's happened to the founders of Yahoo? They've just been booted out. So innovation is a very difficult thing. I'm not sure if I put it in my bio or whatever. My PhD is actually in commercialising innovation. So I'm quite interested in how people take new ideas to market. And this just about sums it up. In the US, there are around 1.5 million patents in force. Now, patenting is only one measure of innovation. Patenting takes a long time, so there are lots of things that are invented that aren't worth patenting. A good example would be iPhone apps. No one's got to patent an iPhone app. By the time you get the patent, someone else has invented a new app anyway, and it's, the opportunity's gone. But it's a pretty good measure of inventive activity. So in America, there's about 1.5 million patents. There's about 3,000 that are commercially viable. And out of those, so the odds are stacked astronomically against inventors. And no matter how hard you market them, a lot of these are simply products for which there is no market. You'd be amazed at the things that people patent. That's for another time. But interestingly enough, out of the commercially viable patents, about 80% of them are owned by 12 companies. Anyone like to guess which company in the world has the most active commercial patents? Apple? Ooh, no. Actually, Apple have a few, but funnily enough, a lot of Apple's commercially viable patents are old. Because you think about things like iPod, iPad, there's not a lot of new technologies in those. Apple's actually interesting going from being a technology company to a brand company.
Nokia.
Sorry?
Nokia.
No.
Pfizer.
Sorry, Pfizer. Pfizer's one of them. Yep.
Johnson & Johnson.
No.
GlaxoSmithKline.
No.
Bayer.
We're going to be here for a long time, couldn't we? No, next. IBM has the most. In fact, IBM has so many that there's an interesting thing. Everyone talks about corporate social responsibility. Out of IBM's patents, some of them, as you roll over, you've got to pay to renew them. And as they decrease in their value, IBM actually give the patenting rights away to charities, and the charities get the intellectual property rights. Now, they're obviously not giving away massive incomes of technology, but they're commercially profitable. So each year, IBM gives away about 100 patents. Now, of course, IBM is an innovative company. How's IBM going in personal computers? Sold out. Who they sell to? Lenovo. So, once again, IBM's ability to create value in a particular market passed them by. It wasn't their core business. It wasn't what they were really good at. Okay, you all remember that from last week, and this little bit. I just want to dig a bit deeper on some of these ideas. And I should just warn you is the wrong word. Later this week, I'm going to send out the information about the group assignments. Is anyone here who's not in a group? Okay, a few people. We'll try and fix it up before we all go. What I'm going to basically ask you to do is look at an organisation, look at the value it offers customers and how successfully it offers value to customers and how successfully it delivers it. I'll formalise that in a communication with you later in the week. So basically we're going to look at this equation. What does a particular organisation, product, brand do to create value for their customers? Now what's the offer that they make to customers and how do they actually deliver it? And we mentioned this idea of value disciplines. This is an important concept we're actually going to spend some more time talking about I think next week, not the week after. This idea of what are we actually good at that offers value to customers. So let's start off with this idea of choosing the value. Now we spoke very briefly about this last week and we said it looks something like that. I just want to sort of expand that out a bit to say when you look at most products, if they're going to be successful, they offer something like that. What are the product features? How does the product perform? Conformance really just means that it meets particular standards. It's reliability, it's packaging and design. That's not an exhaustive list, but it's a reasonably extensive list. Then we have this other thing called support services. So after you buy the product, what do you get with it? Distribution, installation, merchandising, training, and so on and so on and so on. Now, most people here would be Microsoft Word users. Yeah, we all use it sometimes. How many of you would think that you would use 50% of all the features of Microsoft Word? Is anyone? I've never met anyone who said yes to that. Who would regard themselves as a sort of reasonably expert user? Okay. I don't know how to judge it. Yeah, sorry, I don't know how to judge you. I just know how to judge generally. All I do is type stuff in and hope it works. Let's say it's something like Excel. How many of you would regard yourselves as advanced users of Excel? Okay. So some people with program in Excel use all the different functions, all those sorts of things. Not many of us. Most of us just enter columns of numbers in and they all add up, and we think it's pretty cool if we can average things out and stuff like that. And then we realise we've missed the wrong button because this little hatch thing comes up. Now, it's interesting with someone like Microsoft, because if you're Microsoft, you'd like people to become brand loyal with you. So why doesn't Microsoft encourage us to learn more about their products? Because if you learn more about the product, what are you doing? Well, you're investing.
The ability to innovate on the product. So
yeah.
The more you learn about Excel, the more knowledge or the ability you increase your ability to program yourself, I guess.
Yep. So you get some independence, but you're also investing in that particular product by investing time, effort, energy, and all those things in becoming a more expert user. So having spent all that time, effort, and energy in becoming an expert user, it becomes more difficult to change. I'm not sure how many of you ever used statistics. Anyone here used statistics packages like SPSS or other? There's probably other ones. You'll find most academics use different packages, but once you use one, you stick with it forever, as long as they keep on upgrading it, because you make an investment in using it. So sometimes these sorts of things can actually be ways of creating loyalty. If people understand how to use things better. Now we mentioned last time how often people go to McDonald's. And no one goes there for the product. They go there because it's quick and clean and cheap. So no one's going for the product. They're actually going for the other things. Then, of course, we have the relationship management side of it. Competence, courtesy, credibility, all those sort of customer service type things. We mentioned last week, I gave the example of the doctor. The doctor is a classic example of where we find it very difficult to judge the product. We find it very difficult to judge the technical capability. And then there are things like image. What does the company stand for, and brand reputation. This thing of atmosphere is really just the environment in which you deal with someone. So if you had to go and visit a doctor, and the doctor was sitting in the garden shed on top of a wheelbarrow and said, just take a seat out there between the rakes and the shovel, you would probably think that they might be perhaps not the same as if they were wearing a white coat with all sorts of plastic knees and all those sorts of things around them. So plastic knees are very top of mind this week. I had to go and see an orthopaedic surgeon last week. Anyway, and of course media publicity. What